Hello, I'm Andy Agapangelo. I'm the founder of the Transparency Task Force, which is a certified social enterprise. We exist for one purpose, to try to get the financial industry to behave itself so that it serves society as it should. And frankly, a great deal of our work is all about attending or attempting to ensure that the regulators perform the job that they are supposed to be performing. What we are witnessing day after day, week after week, is a calamitous and catastrophic breakdown in the functioning of all kinds of parts of the system that are supposed to provide protection to consumers and, perhaps even more importantly, supposed to provide a means to redress injustice if in some way harm has been caused. You all know that this event is about bringing to life, for those of you that weren't there, mostly for those of you that weren't there, the proceedings of our Enough is Enough March for Justice for Victims of Financial Misconduct. Now, some of you may know that before the march actually started at the Royal Courts of Justice, there was a press briefing a little while beforehand, and I had the privilege and the honour of starting off that press briefing. When I spoke at the press briefing, I talked about one of the Transparency Task Force volunteers, and it feels totally appropriate for me to also begin this event talking about Ian Davis, rest in peace. Some of you will know Ian, will have known Ian. Ian was a Transparency Task Force volunteer, and very, very sadly, Ian became a victim of one of the larger catastrophic regulatory failures, London Capital and Finance. If you want to know more about the London Capital and Finance catastrophic regulatory failure, you can just Google it. In fact, if you Google Dame Gloucester, Gloster, London Capital and Finance, that will take you straight to a very detailed forensic report by Dame Elizabeth Gloucester, a really remarkable document cataloguing just how London Capital and Finance was one of many catastrophic regulatory failures that caught thousands and thousands of people out. And the Financial Conduct Authority, frankly, did an awful job with London Capital and Finance. That's just not my opinion. You can read the document yourself. I'm sharing my screen to show you this, folks. It's what's called an early day motion. An early day motion is simply when parliamentarians want to make a statement in Parliament. And I read this out at the press briefing. I'm going to read it out now. And I'm going to do that for a particular reason, because in so many ways, the case of Ian Davis, rest in peace, brings together so many of the reasons why we quite literally took to the streets as a collective endeavour a couple of weeks ago to march about the failure of the authorities to do what they should be doing to protect consumers from harm. So bear with me, folks, as I read this out. But this House, that being the House of Commons, records its great sadness of the sudden death of Ian Holland from Dunshort, Fife, at the age of just 61 years. Notes that Ian lost his entire life savings in the London Capital and Finance scandal, and that he became increasingly frustrated at the difficulties he then encountered in attempting to ensure that those responsible for the fraud were fully brought to justice, and that government departments and regulatory agencies should be quicker and more open in acknowledging their own failings. Places on record a deep concern that these experiences appear to have been significant factors in Ian's tragic decision to end his own life. Commends the dedicated work he carried out as a volunteer for TTF, and should try to make sure other investors were better protected than he was. Ian was doing that diligently till typically 3 o'clock in the morning, trying to piece things together and trying to help ensure that others didn't go the same way that he did, becoming a victim of a major fraud, a major scandal. Continuing with the early day motion, the House further commends his courage in speaking publicly about how he became a victim of fraud, calls upon the government to ensure that all agencies involved in the fight against fraud are properly resourced and held to account for their performance in protecting innocent people from fraud, and sends its heartfelt condolences to Ian's family and friends as they come to terms with their loss. So that was the early day motion. It was tabled, as you can see, on the 14th of March 2023. It was co-signed by many parliamentarians who wanted to place on record the concerns about what had happened to him. It's such a sad situation because Ian took his own life because of what happened. Perhaps to make that a little bit more accurate, Ian took his own life. I personally don't think because he was scammed, but because for 3 years after he lost all his money, and he was just approaching retirement, for 3 years after he lost all of his money, Ian went round and round and round in circles, trying very, very hard to piece together all the little clues about what had been going on, and trying very hard indeed to share that with the authorities, particularly the Financial Conduct Authority. Now, we know a lot about Ian's case. I'm going to be sharing with you folks something that's publicly available online. It's on the website of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Investment Fraud and Fairer Financial Services. And it's a recording of Ian speaking in October 2022. It's just about 6 minutes or so. I genuinely think, looking back on what Ian said on that day, he sums up everything about this event, why we took to the streets last week, sorry, the week before last, why we are here now. So can I please invite you, please, all to listen very, very attentively to what Ian said. This is literally just a few months before he hanged himself, in a state of complete frustration. And I will always carry a certain amount of frustration, guilt, concern, worry, anxiety, call it what you like, that we didn't even then realize just how bad things were for Ian. It's so terribly, terribly sad. I'm going to try to share this now, so bear with me. You may need to listen very, very attentively, but let me just play it for you, because I do think this says it all so much. But the reason this video was added to this webpage, by the way, is because the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Investment Fraud and Fairer Financial Services has been carrying out a forensically detailed account of the Financial Conduct Authority, a regulator that I personally think is performing very, very ineffectively indeed. So let's see if we can play this, folks. I hope it can, and I hope you can see it. If only we knew then what we now know, maybe Ian would still be with us. Thank you very much. We're going to go to Ian Davis, then we'll go to Mark Bishop. Thank you, Louise. Mr. Davis, please take yourself off mute and just share for a couple of minutes what's happened to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. My name is Ian Davis. Unfortunately, I was a victim of London Capital Finance back in 2018. Anyway, I suppose to actually help myself get over it, I just decided to get stuck into it and do an investigation. And it all started off with one of the solicitors. I discovered he was he was also, apart from being a solicitor who created the security trust, he was also on the borrowing companies, and he also acted as London Capital Finance's solicitor as well. created a security trustee which claimed to have 120 years service. This turned out to be a dormant company which had only been established 7 months before. That was a complete lie. This was actually in the London Capital Finance promotion, which was also promoted by an FCA regulated company called Sentient Capital. There was another thing, the law firm, it was claimed to be Bus Merton LLP. That company didn't even exist. It was struck off in 2015 with a £2.9 million debt. And there was a company which was called GC Partners. It also it shared the same address as the Global Security Trustees when it was taken over by the Boss of London Capital Finance. So basically, the Boss of London Capital Finance controlled the security trustee for some months. That's just the start of it. Anyway, to cut a very long story short, I've got around 70,000 files on London Capital Finance, all this fraud and corruption. It's like a giant spider's web. There's about 350 companies involved in this, which I'm currently watching, all kind of linked. And this is actually linked to total global crime. It's absolutely unbelievable. There's chartered accountants involved with it. There's solicitors involved with it. There's connection to well-known fraudsters. One of the borrowers of London Capital Finance, who was actually a chartered accountant, two of his friends have just been jailed for a total of 27 years. I've even got a wedding video of this chap at this chap's 50th birthday. Anyway, all this evidence has been sent to the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales. Basically, all I'm trying to do is just basically say that this chap's not acting with integrity. He shouldn't be a chartered accountant. He should be struck off. But that's just the very, very basic. I haven't really gone for all the sort of criminal stuff. But anyway, to cut a long story short, I've been battling with 2 years. My case was dropped by the Institute of Chartered Accountants Wales, and they basically lied to the Financial Reporting Council. To cut a long story short, I've had the case reopened. That's just currently going on. I've got reported other people to the Financial Conduct Authority who are also acting with criminals. The FCA, again, will not do anything to remove these individuals. And it's just the same story as everyday else. You get stonewalled by all the governmental departments. You have the National Crime Agency, Serious Fraud Office, NFIB, Kent Police, City of London Police. I've been through a whole lot, written letters to emails, Boris, Rishi Sunak, basically all the ministers had basically correspondence from him, never had a reply. Lord Chief Justice never had any reply. And it's just like bashing your head against a brick wall, basically. Yeah, so that's my story. It's the same as everybody else's, really. Yeah.
Ian, thank you very much indeed. And again, if anybody's unconvinced that what's being discussed tonight is true and authentic, then get in touch with me, and I'll do what I can to show you the proof that you need to believe what's been going on. This might or might not seem like a strange thing to do, but I just want to ask you to join me in thanking Ian for what he said that day and for the work that he did as a volunteer. He talked just then about rotten accountants, rotten lawyers, rotten professional bodies, rotten regulators, and all the rest of it. And that really is what the Enough is Enough March for Justice was all about. Looking back on that, you can hear in his voice, he was such a frustrated man, getting increasingly despondent and quite literally losing the will to live. Can I please invite everybody to join me just for a moment in showing our appreciation to Ian Davis. He's not with us now, but he is in spirit, if you get the drift. Thank you very much, Ian Davis. Please join me in thanking him. Thank you very much indeed. More and more of Transparency Task Force's work is becoming dedicated to trying to help people who are right on the edge because of what's happened to them. Some people lose huge amounts of money at a time in their life, typically when they're elderly, when they really can't do much about it, and it's a catastrophic destruction of wealth and well-being. And having spoken to dozens, if not hundreds, of victims of that kind of regulatory failure, I know with absolute certainty that the pain they feel through being let down by the authorities that are supposed to be there to do their job is as much, if not even more, than the pain they feel as a consequence of losing the actual money itself. It's truly saddening. In a moment, we're going to hear from Andy Candy. Andy Candy, like Ian, is a very active member of the Transparency Task Force community. Andy is one of the 22 case studies in this document here for cases of financial crime. I'll put a link to the online version of this. 22 case studies of people who've been harmed by the system. And if you read those case studies, you'll very quickly come to the conclusion that there's a clear recurring theme, which is that there is multi-agency failure. The regulators, the enforcement authorities, the investigation authorities, none of it seems to be doing its job properly. And we can only hope and campaign that it fixes itself in the future. What I've asked the speakers to do tonight, folks, is simply to read their speeches, refer to their speeches that they used at the event last week. If Andy Candy is here, he is. Andy, we're going to be going to you next because you, sir, were the first one who spoke at the event. I've got vivid memories of you standing there proudly next to you outside the Royal Courts of Justice, Andy. After you've said what you're going to say, Andy, if you don't mind, I'll ask one or two questions and then we'll go to the next speaker, and then the next speaker, and the next speaker after. So can we please show our appreciation, folks, to Mr. Andy Candy, who's going to be sharing with you what I think is one of the most powerful testimonies you're ever going to hear. Mr. Candy, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that, Andy. I'll head straight into it. So enough is enough. The destruction and asset stripping of hundreds of small businesses like mine by HSBC was brought about by the banking sector's dishonest and fraudulent mis-selling of thousands of interest rate swaps and hedging products. Thanks to the outstanding work of various organisations and courageous journalists, we now know that we're also victims of a massive derivatives accounting fraud that was then covered up with the apparent assistance of the UK establishment, the false flag regulators, and numerous government departments, to the degree that it has still not been fully exposed and the victims still not properly compensated. To my mind, it is not a coincidence that this situation shares many similarities with the top-down institutional collusion and corruption we are seeing exposed as a result of the shocking Post Office inquiry. As a result of the establishment cover-up of the interest rate swaps fraud, thousands of victims were dishonestly forced to engage in the stressful, time-consuming and further financially damaging process of dealing with the Financial Ombudsman Service, the Financial Services, now Financial Conduct Authority, and the utterly repellent Business Banking Resolution Service. In my experience, these organisations have all proven to be fundamentally dishonest and unfit for proper purpose, and they have inexcusably failed to uphold the regulations and the law, not to mention fairness, truth, and justice. Shockingly, these organisations also appear to have acted in bad faith, and as a result may have actively and knowingly assisted the banks and their confederates subject customers to further criminal conduct, theft and frauds, including most egregiously through abuses of the law and the courts. The unprofessional and dishonest behaviour of staff with whom I've engaged at every level within these organisations has been a truly shocking and traumatic experience, and sadly one I share with thousands of UK and Irish SMEs and citizens. The collective experience and evidence of the victims of numerous financial scandals gathered here today is a damning indictment of the contempt with which banks, regulators, the government, the Treasury, and HMRC all purposefully target and mistreat small and medium businesses and citizens who are rightfully seeking full and fair compensation for the crimes committed against them. The damage that is inflicted as a result of all this to the wider UK economy is truly staggering, and not just measured in the billions, but in an ever-growing body count that sickeningly exposes the deliberate abuse of human rights being perpetrated in plain sight. This situation cannot be allowed to continue, and I say enough is enough. I'm here today to stand united with all those that have suffered the same mistreatment and injustices across multiple ongoing financial scandals. And I call on all members of Parliament and the House of Lords to utilise their powers to ensure that this broken and corrupted system is brought into the sunlight and exposed and healed through a statutory public inquiry.
Fantastic. Andy, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions to draw out particular elements of what you just spoke about, Andy. First of all, thank you very much indeed for reading that out. It's extremely well.
You're welcome. Thank you for the opportunity to read it out.
You're welcome. You mentioned the BBRS. Only a small percentage of the people on this conversation will know what the BBRS is. Could you tell everybody what was the BBRS meant to be, and what has it actually been in practice?
It was supposed to deal with all outstanding historic issues that had been fought and campaigned against by a variety of different issues, from CYBG to interest rate swaps to GRG, and it was supposed to look at those properly and fairly and deal with them, and it didn't, and it was a stitch up from the very beginning, and it was just the banks doing what they do with the collaboration of the government and the regulators. It was a totally dishonest and fraudulent process, start to finish.
Thank you, Andy. I'd like to go on record to support what Andy just said. I'm happy to repeat those same words. It was a stitch up from the beginning. It was designed to protect the banks by minimising the amount of compensation. Think of this, folks. Think about how rotten the system's got to be when quite literally thousands of business owners were ripped off by the banks, backed beyond any dispute. And then the authorities, the Financial Conduct Authority, the Treasury, the trade bodies such as UK Finance, etc., organised, listen to this, for the compensation to the victims of the crime, some of it was no doubt criminal, to be administered by and adjudicated on by an organisation set up by the banks. How crazy would it be, folks, for somebody's house to be burgled, for the police and the judge to then say to the burglar, you're in charge of determining how much time you're going to spend in jail for doing what you just did? Everybody would think that was crazy. And I've asked Andy to mention the BBRS because it's such a really good example of how sick the system is when the culprits are in charge with justice being administered to the victims of the misconduct. The entire system is riddled with far too much malpractice, misconduct, mis-selling, and outright fraud. And the BBRS is a very, very good example of that. Andy Candy, thank you very, very much indeed, sir. I really do hope that folks who haven't heard Andy speak.
Can't hear you, Andy.
I'm sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah. In a moment, we're going to hear from Mr. Paul Weir, who is a long-term campaigner with EMAG, the Equitable Members Action Group. Again, I'm going to invite Paul to speak based upon the speech he produced for the day. And please pay in particular attention to how long Paul and his colleagues have been battling away for to try to get the justice and compensation the system admits they should be getting. It's nuts. Can we please not only thank Andy Candy, but also welcome to the mic, so to speak, Mr. Paul Will. Thank you, Andy, and thank you, Paul. Over to you, Paul. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Excellent. Good. This speech is going to be slightly strange, standing on a coffin, ranting in front of the Treasury, and today talking to the small screen. So when I start making visual references to the Treasury behind me, it may sound a bit weird. I'm one of a million people robbed of part of my pension by the Treasury and other regulators who failed to control Equitable Life for over a decade. We lost a significant part of our retirement savings. Personally, I lost £64,000, and I'm still waiting for the Treasury to pay me the £50,000 that's still missing. I and nearly 1 million other victims of the Equitable Life scandal have received only 22% of our acknowledged losses. In 2008, the Parliamentary Ombudsman called on the government to fund a compensation scheme. She said it should put those people who have suffered a relative loss back into the position that they would have been in had maladministration not occurred. The government accepted that victims' losses amounted to £4.1 billion, but only announced £1.5 billion in compensation, citing the state of the public finances at the time. We're still, now in 2024, owed £2.6 billion, and that's without any consideration of the interest we've lost over the last 15 years. Had the Treasury and other financial regulators done their job properly, we wouldn't have lost our pension savings in the first place. I know this story. Sorry, I've just scrolled. I know this story will be only too familiar to many of the people on this march today. We say, when the state or its agents do something wrong and acknowledge their culpability, they should provide full and proper redress, not token handouts. The government and its agencies shouldn't hold themselves to a lower standard than those it requires and expects of everybody else. To add insult to injury, the Treasury even plans to pocket £180 million of underspend of our compensation money, despite itself being a guilty party to the administration, the maladministration. In my many meetings with Treasury ministers and officials, I've discovered that they are much better at collecting money than dispensing it. I fully support this march, this collective endeavour, because we have all experienced something similar. We have all experienced our version of the catastrophic systemic failure that has and is continuing to cause carnage as far as people's well-being and financial security is concerned. This just isn't good enough. The UK is better than this, and we should demand better from all the authorities that have the power, the remit, and the responsibility to protect consumers from financial crime, financial misconduct, and outright fraud, and the power, remit, and responsibility to help sort out the messes when things go horribly wrong. This year is a general election year. Let's do all we can together to motivate our politicians to drive the kind of reforms that are so desperately needed. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Paul, you're a long-term campaigner. You've been in this space for many, many years. What do you think it's going to take to actually fix what needs fixing? Because clearly there's a lot broken here.
A moral renaissance, I think, because we've seen all this pragmatism. We've seen the banks, the regulators, figures in the Treasury all bonding together to protect themselves. We're seeing it now with the water companies and everything else. And we're seeing it with the contaminated blood. We've seen it with WASPI. We've seen it with the post office scandal. And it's frankly, it's very depressing because nothing seems to move. But in a kinder, more moral society, perhaps we could move towards resolving these problems. But I've said in the past to MPs, in groups of MPs, that there was a point at which I spread my money in 20 different directions to cover myself. And jokingly, they said, "Oh, tell us who you've invested with so we can avoid them." But yes, I still feel insecure when it has that £85,000 protection. We were protected by the regulators with our pensions. 90% of our pot was supposed to be protected. Come the day, it wasn't, because they contrived a situation where it didn't go into administration and then dip the money out of our pockets, which is where our losses come from.
Well, thank you very much. That phrase, they contrived the situation. As you know, Paul, your Equitable Life case going back 20 years is so similar to what's happened this year in relation to the Woodford scandal. Later on, we're going to be hearing from Alan Pyatt talking about his experience with the Woodford scandal. But again, it's the same thing happening here. There were rules in place those rules were distorted, abused, games, re-engineered, call it what you like, to create a particular outcome. And that outcome was the people who suffered were the victims of the malpractice in the first place. It's wholly wrong. Of course, you're right to make reference to it being a general election year. Somehow, folks, what we must do is find ourselves with a government that cares sufficiently about the moral integrity of the system. You know, profit is being put above people, money is being put above morals. The complete breakdown of integrity in the system is frankly quite depressing. And in extremis, it results in situations like we've seen with Ian Davis and many others. Paul, can I briefly ask you to talk about why when you ran your march where you had several coffins, why did you have coffins there? Help people understand the scale of the Woodford scandal, sorry, the scale of the Equitable Life scandal through that. Thank you.
I think it was 2009 that we did that. It was a very effective and powerful image for the media. We calculated at the time on the back of an envelope that 15 people of our members, the victims, would have been dying every day without getting any compensation. Yes, you can imagine the curve now is accelerating because we're all getting older. But at the time, we said 15 people dying per day waiting for justice, put stickers on the coffins. And yes, we took 15 coffins to Parliament and put them out on opposite Old Palace Yard.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Does anybody want to come in with a quick comment or question for Paul before we move to our next speaker, Professor Nigel Harper? If anybody's itching to share a thought, please just wave your hand and let me know. Mr. Paul Carnier, thank you very much indeed. Paul's going to be speaking later, so you'll get to know more about Paul if you don't already, but let's go to Paul now. Thank you.
Hi, Paul. I mean, and everyone, I think what Paul's highlighted there is exactly what we're seeing playing out in the post office scandal. People realised there was a problem, and instead of owning it and putting their hand up, it's okay, we just have to continue the lie, or we have to retrospectively change the rules, or we have to engineer a narrative, or in this case, it will avoid the administration. Either way, it's just anything to avoid accountability and avoid justice. And, you know, it's got to stop. And hopefully the post office scandal is exposing it, you know, bit by bit, you know, what's gone on there. But that's what we need here. And I mean, I can't. What do you do, Paul, when you've got a decision in your favour, and you still don't get paid out? I mean, it's just extraordinary.
Yes, no, that's how it is, and it's deeply frustrating. We in our campaign, we were big news for 10 years, 12 years, and now everybody says, "Oh, you've been dealt with, haven't you? You got something," and that's the Treasury's just sitting there twiddling their thumbs, waiting for us all to die. So the chances to come up with another arresting stunt are limited. And yes, we're slowly dwindling. We've got a lot of support, good, strong moral support, cross-party, about 300 MPs in our APPG, which is great. We've had debates in Parliament. The vote always goes our way, but it's not a money motion, and nothing changes.
Well, thank you. You might remember me mentioning at the March, Paul, that, and thank you, Paul Carlier. You might remember me mentioning on the March, Paul, that there's that famous Harold Wilson quote. Harold Wilson, of course, the Prime Minister from back in the 1970s. Whichever party is in power, it's always the Treasury that's in charge. Whichever party's in power, it's always the Treasury that's in charge. To my mind, that phrase sums up a big part of the problem here. Even with massive support in Parliament for redress and compensation for the victims of Equitable Life, if the Treasury don't want it to happen, it isn't going to. It seems to be the way. For those of you who are at the march, you'll remember that we were shouting and chanting outside the HM Treasury, or we called it on the day HM Treasury, you know, shame on you, because they really are at the heart of so many injustices. Coming to my mind right now is the way that the Treasury has behaved in relation to the mortgage prisoners. people, of which there are tens of thousands of people whose lives are being turned upside down, paying massively more than they should be on their mortgages, because in plain language, the UK government did a rubbish job of the due diligence when their mortgage books were sold to vulture funds, leaving the vulture funds free to do pretty much whatever they wanted. There's a lot wrong in the system. Our next speaker is Professor Nigel Harper. Professor Harper had, if you like, special dispensation to write a longer speech. At the March, he was spoken on his behalf by Trevor Meelan. It's really good that that Professor Harper is able to deliver it live now. Please do listen attentively. There's a lifetime's experience into this. So can we please thank Paul Weir, who's just spoken, as we say thank you and come to the mic to Professor Harper. Thank you, Nigel. Over to you, sir. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everybody. I am a slightly outside person looking in here, other than the fact that my profession has destroyed most people in the country. I fully support this march against tyranny and the evil establishment in this country. Having worked at HMRC, I quickly recognised that the executive has been captured and it is now ineffective. Chancellor's friends, non-doms, get what they want, while the majority of the UK citizens are victims of the lawyers and accountants. These same people are employed by the chancellors to write tax laws, and they leave gaping holes in the laws they draft or write for them to walk through unchallenged when they return to private sector firms who second them to the Treasury in the first instance. Tax evasion is rife, and most multinational companies are expert at it, especially as most chancellors do their bidding and instruct HMRC to go easy on their friends. NatWest and Lloyds Banking Group accounts are works of fiction. I know this, I worked on them for years. The algorithms used are meaningless. Both banks did not complete the spreadsheets that HMRC wanted. I prepared these spreadsheets. They both said that it would take too long to find the information, and they did not have the information. I took this to be lies. How can HMRC write off loans when the information is not available? The Chancellor had his hands all over this. I know this because Hammond phoned my boss and took me off the case, basically, when I was digging too deep. Why had their loans gone bad? Bad lending policies and bad underwriting, false documents, false valuations. One tanker leasing defeasance lie by a banker cost the Treasury 100 million. I wanted him prosecuted, but was told to keep quiet. This happened a lot. It's quite funny, actually, in this case in particular, because I had an email change from the Lloyds Bank manager to the independent valuer, telling the independent valuer how to value the tanker for the benefit of the tax office. And the valuer, to his credit, wrote back and said, "Are you sure?" Anyway, the banker wrote back to him and said, "Yes." Anyway, as a result, we had to write off £100 million loss. The bank's accountants were very unhappy when I redrafted the Consumer Credit Act whilst working on a case at HMRC. My additions and amendments were stringent, to say the least. However, they were very necessary. HMRC is a classic example. HSBC is a classic example of this. When I reported HSBC executives to Andrew Bailey at the FCA for egregious money laundering involving a film scheme, he conveniently misplaced my 86-page report. I also sent this to my directors and the Treasury. Enough is enough when bankers systematically abuse the classification of sophisticated investor. I was able to approve this point in the upper tier tribunal when I asked HMRC barrister to ask an investor in a film scheme to explain to the court his exposure to a massive tax liability he had. The investor could not. HSBC were totally responsible for the financing of the scheme, and their accountants, KPMG, who sold the scheme to the investor. led the investor into the HMRC trap. The investor, an unsophisticated investor, had no idea of the tax liability that he was exposed to, in excess of £5 million. The investor was a broken man. Bankers lending typically 25 to 30% deposits for a scheme to high net worth individuals, which results in HMRC tax rebate of circa 70%, is blatant fraud in most honest people's perspective. Chancellors are ignoring their role in the creation and oversight of these schemes and then blaming investors for participating in them. And it is the bankers, and it is time the media hear the real story. A fraud greater than the postmaster scandal, supported by former chancellors. Exactly the same modus operandi used by successive chancellors. The narrative is being twisted by the Treasury ministers, its chancellors, its architects of the scheme, and the accountants and the enablers to support their high net worth individuals who bankers sell such schemes to. The Bank of England is also responsible for permitting the City of London Corporation to engage in such egregious tax evasion schemes, which involve money laundering as well, for the benefit of the crooks who fleece the Treasury and taxpayers daily. The Bank of England is supposed to regulate the City of London, and it does not. The post of remembrancer, a master of the Supreme Court, needs reform and should be abolished. The legacy of this post enables an antiquated feudal system to operate throughout the City of London, which has no apparent oversight or regulator. The pensions regulator is impotent and ineffective and needs to be closed and a forceful regulator installed. My pension took a £30,000 hit when Andrew Bailey, panicked by the liability-driven investments debacle, made a margin call. Only one has to look at Holland to see what a mess the EU are inflicting upon their citizens' savings for retirement. Their pension funds are under attack in the EU by WEF, WHO. Bailey is following their lead. We can reflect upon Gordon Brown's largest raid on pension funds and his introduction of film schemes and pharmaceutical schemes. Film schemes were encouraging investors to enter them to revitalise the British film industry. These investors were actually encouraged by government to enter these extremely flawed schemes. It is now extremely unfair for government, HMRC, HMT to now characterise anybody in these schemes as an immoral tax avoider. Indeed, I do recall an envy running through government of any footballer engaged in such schemes. It has to be understood that footballers are not sophisticated investors. The complexity of such schemes is such that I would challenge anybody to understand them. HMRC did not. Chancellors are to blame as they encourage banks to set up these schemes from which they garnered vast profits, and the result was to defraud the taxpayer. The banks escape and evade any sanction or scrutiny. Call to action. I am certain that all banks and bankers belong to the same club and they share the same dirty schemes amongst themselves. They are reckless and put the country's financial security at risk. We saw how effective they were in 2008. 2008 has never been addressed and the bonuses get bigger by the day. Fines equate to crimes and bankers, accountants and lawyers have paid humongous crimes. City of London is the centre for money laundering and tax evasion. One reason is that our laws are badly drafted by the very people they're supposed to control. They're exploited by salesmen for bankers, lawyers, accountants, and anybody else who steals from our country. The Office of Tax Simplification has failed in its duty to police tax evasion and money laundering. Serious organised crime using tax evasion as their preferred weapon against the country. Look no further than those sitting in Parliament and the Lords, JCB, Moan, water companies, Chancellor and his family. using tax evasion against the country. Not forgetting the Lupton, Osaria, Budenberg, et al. And his pals. Lying at AGMs is not a good policy. And I actually challenged Budenberg at his AGM a couple of years back, and he lied to me. Needless to say, he had a really rough ride. What I say now, it's an absolute mess. The public must wake up, supported by the media. One interesting feature that I have is I love stirring up my local council. And local councils' budgets are a work of fiction. I asked Eastbourne Borough Council for the Police Crime Commissioner's assumptions when she presented her budget to the council for the payment of the police precept. I was told by the council they had never asked or received the full budget. This is robbery by the state for the state. Where do our taxes end up? Sorry, I'm just about to finish. I could talk for hours. Down in the sewer, just like the wastewater in the rivers and the seas. Complete reform of government, banking, parliament is vital to restore some semblance of order, honesty, integrity and transparency, starting with the abolition of bonuses for executives. Bonuses change behaviours from the accepted norms of decency. Look no further than banking. The use of false instruments, false documents, lies, denials, concealments is not banking as I was taught in 1971. And I have to say, I abhor the way this country's gone. And I abhor banking as it is today. Thank you.
Professor Harper, thank you very much indeed for a remarkably powerful account you just given. So thank you very, very much. I think you're very, very well placed to talk about the general decay of standards of conduct and integrity in professional services. I'll ask you to speak to that point in just a moment. Before we go back to yourself, Professor Harper, I don't think Keith Seaton's with us tonight, so the next speaker is going to be Nigel Keynes, who's just put his hand up anyway. So Nigel, after Professor Harper's spoken, we'll go to yourself to make your point relating to what Professor Harper has just spoken, and then please carry on with your talk. So Nigel, tell us, what do you think is behind the general decay of standards and conduct in public life over the last 20, 30 years or so?
It's obvious to me. It is multinational power and money. They all have their vested interest. And until you can break that stranglehold on HMRC, and believe you me, I've been involved in discussions, very heavy discussions, when I've been challenging the directorate of HMRC on many occasions, I have to say, when they weren't doing the right thing. And they were kowtowing to the Chancellor and big business and multinationals. You know, this is what we've got a problem with in this country. Look at, for example, David Cameron. He's swanning around the globe in a £42 million jet. What the hell is that all about? Excuse my French. He annoys me.
Thanks, thanks, Nigel.
It's an abuse of power.
Thank you. And I'm sure everybody's heard of the Nolan principles or the 7 principles of public life. It does seem to us that on a routine basis, those rules are being broken as if they're trivial and didn't matter. We really do have to fight back against all this, folks, and that's what this community is all about. Thank you, Nigel. Thank you, Professor Nigel Harper. We'll go to Nigel Keynes. I think you wanted to raise a point specifically relating to what has just been said. Thank you, Nigel.
Yes, I just wanted to comment in case anybody hadn't picked it up that a court judgment was announced this last week or in the last couple of weeks. The people that were duped in the HSBC film tax scandal took a case against HSBC, and HSBC have been cleared of all liability. Done no harm, nothing wrong whatsoever. So the victims are just left with a massive court bill.
Nigel, I have to say, I'm pretty aware of that case, and I know the inside straight, and I have to say, HMRC were banged to rights, HSBC were wrong.
Yeah, of course.
Fascinating stuff. Fascinating stuff. Can we please both thank Professor Nigel Harper, but also welcome to the microphone. Nigel Keynes is on it already. Thanks, Nigel Harper. Nigel Keynes. I'm really pleased Nigel's here tonight because we mismanaged our times. I mismanaged times at the March, which meant that Nigel Keynes didn't have a chance to deliver the speeches about to deliver here. So, Nigel, to you, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I wrote my speech primarily aimed at MPs in the hope that a few may be listening on the day, and that's still my wish now. I was able actually to give a copy of my speech to my own MP, and he did actually make some use of some of the points that I made in it. So I'm hoping others might do also. So here it is. An address to parliamentarians. Enough is enough. Devastating consequences have impacted on hundreds of thousands of people's lives in recent years because of an explosion of financial crime and a catastrophic failure to act by those who should be protecting us. What is so shocking is the extreme nature of the impact of those crimes. Numerous families have been thrust into penury overnight, leading to life-changing damage that has rippled through to every aspect of their lives, and in many cases causing victims to end their own lives through total despair. There have always been crooks in society, and the police have a strong and respected tradition of protecting us from those crooks. Now, though, a gaping chasm of criminal opportunity has opened up and is being ruthlessly exploited by white-collar crime. Police have not been equipped to properly resourced to deal with this. It is not because the police do not have the powers to prosecute, but because government policy has been to attach much less importance to protecting its citizens from what it dismissively terms as white-collar crime. Victims of white-collar crime fail to understand why their importance has been dismissed and ignored in this way. The government blithely continues to abdicate any responsibility or accountability and points to the operationally independent Financial Conduct Authority as the premier body with arm's length responsibility, just like the government's arm's length relationship with HMRC, the Treasury, and the Post Office. This has been a grievous mistake, and they must now answer for it. Politicians must recognise their own responsibilities here. However much government, of whatever hue, may wish to shrink away from responsibility and accountability, they remain the custodians of ultimate power, vested in them at the ballot box. And they must face that responsibility squarely that goes with that. But the present government is not wholly responsible, even after so many years in office. Parliament as a whole has voted many times on legislation that now forms the inadequate regulatory framework, the foundation of which is the Financial Services Markets Act 2000 and its many subsequent amendments. It is this Act of Parliament that gave rise to the FSA, now the FCA, and the FOSS, and it is this Act that delegates power without adequate democratic control. Now our MPs routinely tell us that they are powerless to help us concerning regulatory failure and cannot hold the operationally independent FCA to account. Clearly, they are right. The FCA, it would seem, has been completely captured by the firms that it is supposed to regulate, and the same law firms that serve it and the city. Perversely, the FCA also has been given immunity from prosecution, so that it effectively operates above the law. Power without responsibility corrupts, and it shows. This must end. Transparency and accountability must be greatly improved regarding HMRC, the Treasury, the FCA, and other supposedly responsible bodies to curtail the inhumane treatment of innocent victims of white-collar crime and regulatory failure. The words of Stuart Mill in 1867 are well known, but perhaps not reflected upon as often as they should be. Bad men need nothing more to compass their ends than that good men should look on and do nothing. Parliamentarians, our earnest plea is for you to do right by your constituents. Collectively, you do have the power to bring meaningful and purposeful change and remove terrible injustice. Do not let the sword of authority that you have been given by ordinary people sleep in your hand, because for you also enough should be enough.
Nigel, that was absolutely first class, sir.
That's
That really was. That really, really was. Nigel, you might have noticed I put a comment in the chat. Power without responsibility corrupts. Let's just unpack that a little bit. Why does power without responsibility corrupt? What are your thoughts on that, sir?
Because there are no consequences for wrongdoing. And there are plenty of avenues for reward for the corruption. There's no balance. And it's pretty obvious where things are. And, you know, we've ended up in a very corrupt society altogether. And, you know, primarily the lawmakers are the only ones that we can rely on to either make the laws and make sure that those laws are actually enforced. If they're not enforced, they're useless, just having words on paper.
Nigel, thank you. Paul's put his hand up. Paul Carlier, thank you.
Nigel makes a good point here about the lawmakers having to take control. But at the moment, we have a situation in the UK where a group of lawmakers, i.e. MPs, who are the APPG, are suing the FCA via a judicial review over the IRHP review. The lawmakers are saying that you acted unlawfully. You did not act according to the laws that we created. And the FCA has gone, no, we don't, you know. So the FCA is literally telling the lawmakers to go and do one, no, we don't accept that, and are racking up huge costs, and I mean significant costs, in an attempt to defeat that judicial review and avoid being held accountable. I mean, if there is a demonstration of this mob is out of control, and it's that, the lawmakers say you're acting unlawfully, and they've gone, we don't care. That's simple as that.
That Paul, you're absolutely right, but I think it ought to be just remembered that really it's the inadequate drafting of the Financial Services and Markets Act that's allowed this to happen in the first place, and it's the politicians that drafted and voted for that Act of Parliament. And until that's radically reformed, those responsibilities at the FCA and the FOSS remain, where there's no consequences for their actions. There needs to be really hard-edged outline of what their responsibilities are, and consequences for failure to enforce those.
There's you're reminding me of some recent work by Yanis Varoufakis, the former finance minister in Greece. He's produced a wonderful series of 6 documentaries. In one of the documentaries, he makes reference to the fact that, and these are my words, not his, that the amount of influence on the democratic process by the banks and others is so big that it's almost bound to influence and infiltrate the way that laws are made. And you have to wonder whether the kind of reforms that really ought to be so obvious to make the regulators do a better job of regulating aren't being enacted because of that kind of influence. Before we go to our next speaker, we'll go to Ian Duffield to put his hand up. Ian, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Andy. The terrible situation here is that if you look at the FSMA, the Financial Services Act, that was put in place by parliamentarians, and their job, rightly, is to carry out the will of the people. And at that point, that would have been great. And they, in their mind, put in place the Financial Services Compensation Scheme, which was meant to provide some encouragement and protection to people, to install confidence in the financial services in this country, and to put in place a way for people to be compensated. And the FCA have just completely driven a coach and horses through it in the latest Link Fund Solutions scheme of arrangement by colluding with Link Fund to deny anybody who lost money in that, and we're talking now retail investors, consumers, doesn't apply to companies, applies to consumers, and just completely removed the statutory rights of consumers against the will of Parliament. And I just find this absolutely staggering that the FCA, who are supposed to be the gamekeepers here, are now gamekeepers who've turned poachers. And the parliamentarians and Parliament are standing by, saying nothing, doing nothing. And what they should be doing is say, look, when we put the FSMA in place, it was our will, because it clearly was, to provide a statutory protection here, or at least the ability for consumers to be able to have access to a compensation scheme, not guaranteed you'd win your case, but certainly have access to it. And the FCA feel that they can just take that away. And Parliament are doing absolutely nothing. No comments, no speeches, no debates, just sitting there and doing absolutely nothing. And the situation is just appalling.
Thanks, Ian. We're going to be hearing from Alan Pyatt later on, who's going to be talking about the Woodford scandal, which is the matter that you're referencing, Ian. Thank you very much for raising that point. I'm still quite shocked. After several months that the statutory protections through the Financial Ombudsman Scheme, the Financial Ombudsman Service and the Financial Services Compensation Scheme were denied after the event to the very people who were supposed to have a claim on it when things go wrong, the Woodford investors. It's still absolutely shocking. You raised a great point, Ian. Thank you. I think we're going to move on to our next speaker now, who is Mr. Paul Carlier. Paul, I'm going to remember for a long, long time you speaking outside New Scotland Yard, referring to your notes on your phone that you may well be doing now. Mr. Paul Carlier, and can we also thank Nigel Keynes for his excellent speeches now? Thank you very much, Nigel, and thank you very much indeed, Mr. Paul Carlier. Thank you. Paul, to you.
Yeah, before I start, I'd like to make just one extra point on this, on FSMA. I think when you look at FSMA as written originally, it looked like it did the job. What you've had is people driving a wedge through it. They have been bastardizing interpretations of it. Some of them that I've seen in the last year are just extraordinary, and they're just, well, that's an interpretation of FSMA, but it's certainly not one that was intended. And I think that's the problem. You know, the FCA spends too much time. I think 25 million a year it spends on its own in-house legal teams, and they're spending time just finding ways around it as opposed to actually regulating and enforcing the spirit of it. So anyway, right, I'll start. I am just going to read almost verbatim what I wrote, what I read that day for the record. So for those who don't know me, I'm Paul Carlier, and I'm speaking on behalf of all victims of fraud, scams, and broader financial wrongdoing, as well as whistleblowers. Victims of financial misconduct in the UK should be protected by our system. But what's worse than a lack of protection is the illusion of protection. What's worse than the illusion of protection is our rights to that protection being subject to and compromised by the failures, conflicts of interest, and yes, ultimately corruption within public bodies responsible for providing that protection. What's worse is when multiple public bodies or multiple parties within the hierarchy of oversight and or with enforcement responsibilities collude, be it intentionally or sometimes inadvertently, so that every layer of protection is compromised and we are all deprived of the free means of protection to which we have a statutory right. What's worse is that none of us will discover any of this until it is too late. What's worse still is that when we discover this, we also discover that our only remaining course of action is legal action, whereupon we discover that bringing any kind of legal action in the UK today has a significant adverse risk-reward scenario that none of us can afford to take. And this is exactly what we have here in the UK today. This is what happened to many of the victims stood here today at the march. They won't feel that they have been protected. They feel let down by each and every organisation that is supposed to be protecting them, and they have been. Nowhere are all of these elements more clearly exposed than the post office scandal. Layer after layer of failure, dishonesty and concealment, even to the point where post office lawyers have been concealing information from the statutory public inquiry whilst being paid millions of pounds to do so. And whilst the post office is paying lawyers and consultants vast sums for their work in settlement discussions, and then offering sub-postmasters as little as 13% of their true damages that they've claimed for. But the post office are not the only institution or public body operating in this way. In fact, the entire hierarchy of oversight here in the UK is infected in the same way. I'd like to share an example of how victims of financial misconduct are being failed, and to use the example of the Blackmore Bond victims. In December 2023, the FCA, and particularly Teresa Chambers, the new head of enforcement, Nikhil Rathi, CEO, and the new chair, Ashley Alder, all made written or oral representations to the Treasury Select Committee regarding Blackmore Bond. They told the Treasury Select Committee that after more than 7,000 hours of investigation into all aspects of Blackmore Bond that fell within the FCA's perimeter authority and powers, they were taking no action against anyone. However, less than 3 months later, in March of this year, lawyers with whom I and victims have been working for almost 2 years initiated legal action against an FCA authorised firm on behalf of Blackmore Bond Series 1 investors who lost a combined 18 million of the 46 million total that was lost. The action is against an FCA authorised insurance broker, a firm and a significant part of the Blackmore Bond scandal that is squarely in the heart of the FCA perimeter and authority, but a firm and whose role in this scandal the FCA has failed to mention once in the past 4 years since its collapse. There is zero chance the FCA did not know of their role and did not have the same evidence I obtained and that is now being utilised by the law firm. And clearly the FCA were not aware that I had obtained the evidence. A commonality between Blackmore Bond and all of the other financial misconduct scandals here today is the abdication of responsibility and objectivity by regulators and public bodies, and collusion with various other public bodies to the ultimate detriment of victims. In the case of the footballers and other victims, how much collusion between or lack of action by police and regulators has there been on behalf of HMRC or other public bodies? And so as to keep things joined up with the HMRC positions or those of the other bodies involved. Evidence we have shows that the Insolvency Service Information Commissioner and City of London Police also buried the Blackmore Bond evidence to help the FCA keep things joined up and conceal the FCA failures. However, another commonality between the financial scandals and the post office scandals, the role of civil servants. This applies in respect to civil servants in HM Treasury in regard to oversight of the FCA and those in the Department for Business and Trade in the case of the Post Office. Governments and ministers come and go, but civil servants remain, and incoming ministers have to rely on briefings and the integrity of those civil servants. So if those civil servants find themselves exposed and therefore conflicted, how reliable are their briefings to the ministers? We urge the incoming government to stop this cycle and listen to the voices of the victims, to be more like Lord Arbuthnot and to look properly at the evidence. Don't rely on the advice of these same civil servants. Challenge that advice. Don't be found later to have not done enough at the time. However, the most important commonality of every fraud, scam or scandal is the victims. And as you can see from those here today, whether you're a former Premier League player, a military veteran, or a lifelong NHS worker, the outcome is the same: loss, distress, and futility. That has to change. For that to change, we need an entirely new hierarchy of oversight. What we have is a hierarchy riddled with past failures and ongoing dishonesty so as to conceal those past failures. Past failures that predetermine the outcome of future issues of the same nature. Bodies that can't take action in respect to the new issue because they failed to take action on a prior issue of the same nature, and so as to conceal their prior failure. It's a case of lather, rinse, repeat. A name that may be familiar to many victims here today is City of London Police, and in particular Karen Baxter. Karen Baxter is the former commander of economic crime at City of London Police. Her disastrous track record and fraud is well documented, as is their catastrophic failure to act on multiple reports about blackmail bond. Many of you may be surprised to hear that she is now a senior figure in the FCA's enforcement unit. A parliamentary event in 2022 that I attended, Karen said, and I quote her, "Victims of fraud are not worried about prosecutions, only about getting their money back." Absolutely wrong. I guarantee that every future victim of fraud would rather they had prosecuted or taken action against previous fraudsters, significantly reducing the chance of them becoming a future victim. Under Karen Baxter, the City of London Police also ignored evidence of systemic fraud by Lloyds Bank's Business Support Unit and RBS GRG, both units within those banks that destroyed many thousands of viable UK small businesses. This includes ignoring correspondence from Anthony Stansfeld, then Thames Valley Police and Crime Commissioner, who wrote to Karen in 2019 confirming and revealing significant evidence of fraud by Lloyds BSU. Miss Baxter, she ignored it, did nothing. Miss Baxter at that parliamentary event in 2022 told me personally that only she and those with experience within the system can provide the solution to the broken system. I disagreed. How can she or those within the system fix it when they allowed it to become so catastrophically broken in the first place? They either didn't see the problems or chose to ignore them. And when those that have spent any time within the system have a series of past failures to answer for, all of that prejudices or compromises their approach going forward. Effective regulation and enforcement is also a vital deterrent, reducing future offending and damages, whereas ineffective or compromised regulation now only encourages future offending and damages. I might support Arsenal Football Club, but we're all members of a much more significant club, Victims United, a club that shouldn't exist, but that must exist if appropriate action and remedy is to prevail. A club that needs nationwide support because whilst many are not currently members of it, one day soon you or a member of your family likely will be. That's why I say enough is enough.
And I will be succinct. I love your reference to Victims United, Paul. It sums it all up so well. We're going to go to Sunil, who raised his hand as you were partway through your talk, Paul. Sunil Chadha, please make your point. Thank you.
I'm a TTF ambassador, a member of the APPG, and for a job, I've worked in the city all my life. The last 10 years or so, I sit on the other side of the fence spotting wrongdoing. And all I'll say to you is I've seen what you're going through. There is another wave of stuff coming through that the press, the courts, and everyone else hasn't seen. And I have to say, I'm truly shocked at the state of the regulations. You can't do anything, right? The FCA refuses to monitor and enforce. Half the rule book is cut off and you can't do anything. So I have to say there's a whole new wave coming through. And this is a result of the complete collapse in our standards as a country, public and corporate life. And I have to say, as a lifelong member, person working in financial services, I am truly embarrassed and sorry to hear the stories that I hear today and that I heard on the march. And I have to say, the only way this is going to change, forget the Lords, forget the civil service, forget MPs. We've got to get out in the streets, and it's public anger, because they are just not going to listen. It's too deep, it's embedded, and they've all taken the money and looking the other way. So that is my honest to God thing, is the public needs to get angry, just like it did with the post office, and we'll see change very quickly. It won't happen otherwise. I'm telling you that.
Well,
And I'm
also-
sad to come to that conclusion.
So thank you very much. I'm also sad that you've come to that conclusion too, but you're talking from a lot of experience there. I think Paul wanted to respond to something you just said. Please do, Paul. Thank
I
you.
mean, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, we're in the midst of a cost of living crisis that is generational, and yet while everyone's struggling, the stock markets are booming, and company profits are booming. Now that's a complete
Paul.
That's an inversion of what should happen when there's an economic crisis for the population. It should mean that businesses are struggling. So for me,
You're right. Could I just say this is happening in every sector across the United Kingdom? Financial services, water, telecoms. We're being overcharged. They're cartels. You name it. Right. And what happens? We have a new industry like broadband or green energy. The government allows firms to enter and they lower the regulation and laws, and they never come back and revisit it.
No.
Right. The whole thing. Companies in the UK, the government helps them. They do not take risk. In the US, it's a bit different. We need to change stuff here. Risk and reward. Companies, they're being overpaid and they're overcharging us. It's everything. I see it. I work in the sector and I can see it, and there's not a lot I can do.
Yeah.
So thank you, Paul. Thank you. We're going to go to Anne-Marie, who's got her hand up. Then we'll thank Paul, and then we'll introduce our next speaker, Alan Pyatt. Anne-Marie, lovely to have you with us, Anne-Marie, as always. Bonjour. What would you like to say, Anne-Marie?
I'm very close to what Sunil is saying. Definitely, if we want to change, we're going to have to be extremely strong about it. And I think once we can actually obtain a change within the powers which actually are directing our education system, then we change the education system. Without changing the education system, we are going nowhere, because we're actually breeding the same kind of principles.
Yeah.
It's not going to go anywhere.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Greed-based thinking. I get your point completely. Can we please thank Mr. Paul Carlier, and as we welcome up to the microphone, Mr. Alan Pyatt. Paul, thank you very much indeed. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Alan, thank you, sir. And Alan is a victim of Woodford, as I'm sure he's going to explain. Thank you, Alan.
Can you hear me? Thumbs up. Can you hear me, anybody?
Perfectly well, yes. Thank you.
So I'm just going to do the speech that I did. It was only limited to 3 minutes, so it's fairly short. And I'll read from the screen, the big screen I got behind me. I'm here today to speak for the 400,000 investors, the majority being retail investors, who have lost £750 million in the last 5 years since their fund was closed, and a further £1 billion before closure through very poor fund management and lack of governance by the authorised corporate director by the name of Link. Now, there are a number of people on this call who also affected by Woodford, and the reason I put the 750 million is we've received a little bit of compensation, but nothing like what we should have done. Basically, all these investors have been very badly let down by the finance system in the UK and the regulatory bodies that are not fit for purpose, and a justice system that has now set a precedent, taking away government safeguards put in place by the Financial Market Services Act of 2000, which were there to protect retail investors, which I'll come on to a bit more later. Retail investor losses range anything from a few £1,000s to well over £100,000. And some of those investors, of course, have been very badly affected by that financial loss, which is nothing to do with themselves. And one institutional investor called Kent County Council, I've estimated, have lost £90 million of their pension fund. So if you're a pensioner in that fund, you won't be very happy. Of course, I'm referring to the Woodford scandal. Retail investors, I know, have tried to raise complaints to the Financial Ombudsman Service regarding Woodford Investment Management. And I'm going to quote now exactly from a response from the Financial Ombudsman Service to 2 of those people. As Woodford Investment Management was neither the operator nor the depository of the fund, your complaint did not arise from the relevant relationship, which means you are not eligible to complain about Woodford Investment Management in this case. Now, that is outstanding on itself alone. So be aware, folks, if you bought things through a platform, you've got no relationship with the fund manager, therefore you can't take them. So if the FOS isn't the right route for investors to complain about, then we'd hope the Financial Conduct Authority would be there to protect retail investors. As the FCA state publicly on their website, and I quote, "We are committed to protecting consumers. We focus on reducing and preventing serious harm, setting high standards to protect the consumer from bad conduct and to protect the integrity of the UK financial system." What a load of tosh. The FCA have totally failed us in the Woodford scandal and many other scandals that we're hearing about today and others we know about. To make matters worse, in 2023, as was spoken about earlier, the FCA colluded with Link in supporting their scheme of arrangement and have hidden behind confidentiality rules. This was not to protect us as retail investors, but was to protect the Financial Services Compensation Scheme from paying out hundreds of millions of pounds in compensation. Unfortunately, the outcome of the scheme of arrangement, there was a High Court judgment in January 2024 that investors can no longer take Link to court or have the right to complain about Link to the Financial Ombudsman Service or to seek compensation through the Financial Services Compensation Scheme. As I said earlier, these were both set by an Act of Parliament to protect retail investors, and they've been taken away from us. So due to this judgment, other financial companies can now use this ruling and abuse it to the detriment of investors for many years to come. So I say, enough is enough. The UK regulatory system is not currently fit for purpose and needs an independent, complete overhaul to ensure it can and will protect UK investors.
Alan, very, very well said, sir. Thank you so much for sharing those thoughts. Remarkably well-structured session. Thank you very much indeed, Alan. We're going to go straight from Alan now to Lynn Parsons. And after Lynn, I'm going to be playing a short video clip from one of the speakers who couldn't be with us tonight, but who kindly prepared a short video for us to watch. And then what we'll do, folks, for those of you that want to stay, we're happy to have a conversation about where we are and where we're going next. But first of all, can we thank Alan whilst also welcoming to the microphone Lynn Parsons. Well done, Alan. Thank you very much indeed, sir. Lynn, lovely to have you with us, as always. It's been a busy week in your land, I know. Lynn, to you. Thank you.
Certainly has. Thank you, Andy. Right, I'll just jump straight in. My name is Lynn Parsons. I'm co-founder of the Phillips Trust Action Group, PTAG. We represent over 2,000 elderly and vulnerable members of 11 UK building societies, who together have lost over £138 million in savings and property following negligent advice from their building societies. Our members were specifically targeted. All of them were over 60, many were newly widowed. They went into their building societies for everyday banking and were sold the services of the estate planning group, comprising the will writing company and the Family Trust Corporation, who put their family homes into a trust along with life savings in many cases. Next in the saga, they were lied to and told that the Family Trust Corporation had gone into administration. It hadn't. And a new entity called the Phillips Trust Corporation would be taking over. PTC placed these investments in high-risk ventures, providing unsecured loans to small businesses, hardly appropriate for elderly, risk-averse people who had chosen to keep those savings safe in a building society. When PTC went into administration, they took with them our members' family homes and savings. Families have had to pay thousands of pounds in professional fees to regain ownership of their homes, and there is very little hope of seeing the savings they invested. Our victims received the brush off from their building societies and complained to the Financial Conduct Authority and the Financial Ombudsman Service. A few weeks ago, the FCA announced that it was not going to investigate, siding with the building societies. Despite hundreds of pages of evidence provided by our members and letters from David Gill, Director of Retail Banking for the FCA, reassuring victims that they were examining the information, that it was complicated, not one victim was approached by the FCA for comment or information, and not one of them has received a response from the FCA. They were simply left reeling after a press announcement late on a Friday afternoon before the Easter break. So how can the FCA make a reasoned judgment when only examining one side of the case? To add insult to injury, the FCA statement contained lies, willful misunderstandings and obfuscation, to put it politely, even putting words into the mouths of Kroll, the administrators, to support their stance, which they were later forced to remove when we pointed out their inaccuracies. Worse still, it's emerged that a whistleblower alerted the FCA to wrongdoing 4 years ago. So not only have the FCA demonstrated an astounding dereliction of duty, ignored victims in favour of the perpetrators, they've delayed a resolution for the victims by 4 years. Victims who are in their 80s and 90s now, they can't wait 4 years. And wait for what? Well, absolutely nothing from the FCA. When things go wrong with our financial institutions, we have a right to expect justice from our regulatory bodies. But the FCA has simply abandoned those people they're there to protect. The FOS have followed suit with a nothing to see here response, and the police don't want to know. So who are these victims? Well, they're my mother. They could be your mum and dad too. They're teachers, NHS workers, miners, ordinary people who worked hard and believed they were doing the right thing to protect their savings for later life and for their families' futures. They weren't financially savvy on the whole, which was why they trusted their building societies in the first place. They were regulated by the FCA. After all, it was perceived to be the safe place to put your savings. What has the impact been for our victims? At the Phillips Trust Action Group, we hear daily from victims and their families. Victims talk of being scammed by people they trusted behind the counter in their building society. The friendly faces they saw weekly when they went into their local branch with their passbooks to take out cash or deposit savings. They feel duped, naive, embarrassed, ashamed that they'd lost everything, that they've let down their families. They're desperate. We hear of individuals unable to move forward with their lives, elderly people who are isolated and abandoned. Phillips Trust Action Group says this is simply not good enough. The FCA, our regulatory bodies, our government has to do better to protect customers who've done nothing wrong. Our current system is plainly not working if it lets down vulnerable people, such as older customers of mutual building societies that were once trustworthy, but sadly aren't now. Either the FCA needs top-to-toe reform or abolition and replacement. Enough is enough. And that's why I'm here today, to be amongst like-minded people who've been badly let down by the system. A system that's very good at getting money from you, but very bad at sorting things out when they go horribly wrong. Whether we've been let down by the FCA, FOS, HMRC, Serious Fraud Office, or whichever agency, body, authority, or regulator it is, it's become obvious to all of us that the system is broken and needs fixing. Enough is enough.
Wonderful, absolutely wonderful. You've captured so much there, Lynn. You really, really have. We're going to hear now from Mary Birch, who's not with us in person. I'm going to be playing Mary's short video clip. Can we once again thank our last speaker, Lynn Parsons? That was superb, Lynn. It really was superb. As we sort of welcome the recording from Mary Birch. Mary's husband, Paul, is a very, very, very active campaigner. Paul was a victim of a QROP, a qualifying retirement overseas pension scheme, I think it's called. Basically a dodgy pension scheme. He was completely shafted by scammers. And Mary is speaking Paul's words on his behalf. So here's Mary. I'm just going to make sure I share this correctly. And then we'll open things right up the conversation. I can see there's quite a bit of interest in doing that. I'm very happy to keep things going. So here we go. Mary Birch, folks. I hope you can hear it okay. You might need to sort of tune in and pay attention a bit.
Qualifying recognised overseas pension schemes scam victims are being failed by the government, past and present. We are promised that we will be protected by the government from financial criminals who fleece our life savings. People like advisors, trustees, their accomplices and enablers, very well-known names, who steal from our pension pots through undisclosed commissions and fees, and cause unbelievable heartbreak to the victims and to their families. The financial organisations tell us that we'll be protected by the FCA, but in fact, protection is the last thing we get. The only thing the FCA protects is the scammers and not the victims. The baton is passed from the FCA to HMRC, other regulatory bodies within overseas jurisdictions, in our case, the Isle of Man and Malta, but they all claim not to be responsible. My husband, Paul Birch, has spent the last 8 years fighting for justice, not only for himself and for me, our family, but for the many thousands of other victims who do not have a voice. We sought the help of our MP, Rob Roberts, who's written to various bodies on our behalf. We've engaged lawyers, we've engaged with the FCA, haven't had anything back from them, but we have engaged with them. Too many organisations to mention, but all to no avail. We support the call today for a statutory public inquiry for all victims. This should investigate why all these scams and fraudulent schemes that are causing so much devastation are going unpunished. And the inquiry needs to examine the role of the unfit for purpose FCA. Even today, there will be people entrusting their pensions to these scammers. Thousands of people continue to be scammed, and hundreds of financiers today will be stealing their money, our money, under the not so watchful eye of those who are supposed to protect us. We cannot allow this to continue. Enough is enough.
Well said, Mary. Well said, Mary. Thank you very much indeed. That was super. Can I please invite everybody to show our appreciation to the speakers? We've heard from a lovely group of people. We just heard from Mary Birch. Before that, we heard from Lynn Parsons. Before that, Alan Pyatt, Paul Carley, Nigel Cairns, Keith Seaton. It looks like he wasn't able to make it. We heard from Professor Nigel Harper and Paul Weir from Andy Candy. Can I please invite you to show your appreciation for the time and the preparation and delivery of those excellent speakers? Every single one of them added to this conversation and added to what we're trying to do here tonight. Thank you all very, very much indeed. We're going to go to Paul Carley, then to Anthony, and then to anybody else that wants to chip in with their thoughts. Paul Carley, thank you very much indeed, Paul.
Just want to pick up on a point that Lynn made about, it turns out there was a whistleblower on this 4 years ago,
Yep.
And it's something that I didn't realise until I blew the whistle at UBS first and at Lloyd's, was that I knew I was exposing my employer and various people within the firm. What I had no comprehension of at the time, and I didn't find out until later, was that I was actually exposing the FCA as well, because it turns out the conduct that I discovered, the FCA either knew had been going on and turned a blind eye to, or they should have been aware of it and weren't, and therefore dropped the ball. So that it was either embarrassing or they were compromised because they turned a blind eye. And this is happening all over the place. Blackmore Bond, my reports in March 17, ignored, dropped the ball, could have stopped it. And every scandal, I guarantee you, there was somebody that blew the whistle or made a report that meant it could have been stopped or prevented and nipped in the bud, but wasn't. And this is something I think this affects 90+% of whistleblowers. Without realising it, you are exposing the FCA. That's why the FCA has taken no action against any firm that causes detriment to a whistleblower, because the FCA has actually been exposed by it for failing to act in the first place. So it's a massive problem.
Well said. Well said. Very, very well said, Paul. We're going to go to Anthony. Anthony, I don't know your surname, offhand. Anthony, what is your
Molyneux.
surname?
Molyneux.
Sorry, Molyneux.
Molyneux.
Thank you very much, Anthony. Please share your thought. Thank you, Anthony.
Yeah. Okay, Andy. What it's basically is I went to a crime conference which the police seem to be having in trying to support local businesses in solving the crime issues. And there was one held in the Winter Gardens in Blackpool. Now, these are going to be held all over the country, is what I was told, and I believe that was the first one that they'd been involved with. Now, there was a chap there who was from the City of London Police who was very helpful, to give him his due, and his name was Patrick Holdaway. So if you want to make a note of his name, Patrick Holdaway. He's the superintendent of the City of London Police Crime Business Unit. Now, obviously, on the day he was up there, along with a lot of senior police officers, trying to promote the police force and what they do to tackle crime and everything else, which was good. So I had a chat with him after he come off stage and basically explained to him what had been going on. I told him action fraud was a waste of time. I explained what we've all talked about for the last 11 years, HBOS trading fraud, he was aware of all those. But he just said, well, I can't deal with your individual case. He said, but if you want to drop me some information, he said, I will take a look at it and see if I can help you in any way. So he did respond, very spontaneous, and he has now managed to get action fraud. For what it's going to be, I'm going through the process. He's got action fraud now to re-look into my case. Now, obviously, I'm not expecting action fraud to come up with anything significant, but what he said, if they then don't deal with it how you want it, you can then make the complaint to the police, which is what we've all done in the past. But he said, if you all ask for it to be reconsidered again, he said, and you start getting more calls with the post office, things that are going on, he said it might put a bit more pressure on people. But he said, because he's in the London Police, he's not in Manchester Police, who dealt with mine at the time in Ashton, the Regional Crime Office, then it might be worth us all just dropping him an email or a line and just sort of like seeing if he can do it. But these crime conference centres, national business crime centres that are opening up, we need to try and monitor where they're appearing. If we could maybe make a mass exodus, all of us down to one of them, because you get all the top police officers there who are expecting to be clapped for what they're saying on stage. It's a bit like an AGM meeting, really. So it might be worth monitoring if we could do that, yeah.
Anthony, that's very helpful and very positive. Would you mind, if you don't mind, put the person's name in that you referred to, put it in the chat so we can try to find a way. If you've got an email address, Anthony, that would be even better.
Yeah,
well,
I'll put it, yeah.
Anthony, that's very helpful. Let's all try to get those meetings. Oh, thank you, Anthony.
Yeah, because I say it's in this. Well, they said they're going to have a lot of them, but this is the first one I had in Blackpool. It's the police, because what they're saying, like shoplifting and crime isn't taken serious in businesses, and they're saying cyber fraud and all this. But one thing what was interesting just before I go was there's a guy there who Lloyd's apparently have sponsored to sort of like train people how to not to become a victim of cyber crime on the computer. Now, I spoke to this guy and I said, how can you be sponsored by Lloyd's when Lloyd's are responsible for what they've done? And he wasn't aware. Well, he said he wasn't aware. So at the time, I had Anthony Stansfield's piece of paper about the cover-ups and revolving doors. So I said, well, would you like to read that? So I gave it him to read, and genuinely, though, he did look shocked at what he was reading. Because I said, you don't want to be dragging yourself into, a situation if you've got the guys that are paying you who are stealing the business, and they're the fraudsters in the first place. So it was very interesting meeting. It went on for like the day. But if we can find out where they are and we could all turn up at them, it could be a good way of getting our points over. So I'll drop that on the line in a minute anyway,
That's an excellent idea, Anthony. Thank you all very much.
All right, cheers for that. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ian Lightbody has just put in the chat, Anthony, Action 4 is funded to the tune of 60 million a year through Lloyd's. And Lloyd spends 20 times that annually on sisters. So you made your point very well to that gentleman. Thanks, Anthony. Thank you, Ian Lightbody. We're going to go to Lisa King and then to anybody else that wants to share some thoughts before we wrap the session up. Lisa, over to you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hello. Can you hear me, Andy?
Yes, we can, Lisa. Lovely to see you as always.
Thank you. Those new to this meeting today, I'll just go backwards a little bit. My late husband and I were victims of a mortgage redress scheme that was by Lloyd's Banking Group, which was set up by the FCA, which resulted in our home almost being repossessed, which is for the last 10 years I've been fighting. Obviously, as I said, my husband has since passed away. Recently, Paul Carlier sent an email to Charlie Nunn and many others the redress scheme was that the bank knew in 2013 that they were failing mortgage borrowers who needed support. In our case, we just needed our interest rate being lowered. Yesterday, I got a response back from Halifax who said that they had fully investigated, and I say that in inverted commas, the complaint and the information that Paul had provided to them. And they disagreed with everything. They said that in December 2018, a deal was struck, and as far as they were concerned, the deal was finished. However, when we did the compensation, because we got a lawyer in the end, I know I'm jumping backwards and forwards here, but I'm a little bit distressed at the moment. They withheld from us the fact that the bank knew from 2013 that they had mistreated my husband. And as far as they're concerned, it's closed, and they are going for repossession of our home now, because I've been put on an interest rate. It was 2.51. It is now 8.79. So my payments went from £815 to £3,000, which I don't even think a member of parliament could afford to pay. So they're going for repossession now, even though they had failed in by not disclosing all the information to us and the courts. They breached the Fraud Act 2006 by withholding all the information. And it's just wrong. It's heartbreaking that they can do this. In their letter, they are no longer going to respond to any correspondence from me, Paul Carlier. Yeah, I have so much evidence here that they knowingly lied, knowingly withheld information. It just sickens me that they can act with such impunity to victims that they know they mistreated, and they just get away with it. The FCA, first of all, upheld the complaint, and then they were told to change it to not upheld the treatment. We received the Financial Ombudsman Service. They failed to adhere to the rules and regulations of the FCA, MCOBS 13. They wouldn't change their rules. But it just gets worse and worse, and I don't think I can take much more.
Lisa, Lisa, are either of your boys with you tonight?
Yeah, they're here. They're aware. I showed them the letter.
Right.
It's just,
Bastards.
they are awful people. Just
Andy,
keep
can I
on.
come in here?
Yeah, yes, please, Ian. Thank you very much. It was very kind of you to put that note in the chat earlier, sir. Lisa, Ian wants to speak. Ian Lightbody, please share your thoughts.
Hello, Lisa. Haven't seen you for a while. I'm absolutely heartbroken for you. You and I met back in Lisa. For those of you who don't know, Lisa is an absolute superstar. Given what she's been through, Lisa and I met in 2019. We both gate crashed Treasury Select Committee when Caroline Wayman, who was the CEO of the FOS at the time, and Sir Nicholas, can't remember his name, but anyway, he was the chairman, and Annette, somebody else who was one of the directors there, and we got meetings with them. I must admit, we went and met with them a number of times, and Lisa was there right both basically doorstepped him in Portcullis House, and Lisa, you would always see Lisa there behind. She was a regular attender at these meetings, and you'd always see her on the footage. And they promised her, in my presence, that they would meet with her and they would deal with her case, given all the heartache and all the hassle. Lloyds Bank could have sorted this in an instant. And look at this lady now. Lisa, I'm sorry, I don't have the funds, but I would help you if I could. And if you need something in the short term, please get in touch. But I'm really, really sorry. We're all on the same boat. The chap earlier who said, I think we need anarchy. I really do. And we've reached that stage.
Maybe quite literally enough is enough.
So
please,
Andy, put me in touch with Lisa. At least I've got your details and something, but please get in touch if and I'll do everything I can to help you.
Thank you, Ian. It's just one more thing, Andy. I just want to say, it's just, I've got piles of paper here in date order, and I found an email from the legal representation that Paul helped us get. In it is a reference to the lawyer had a conversation with Matt Brewis at the FCA.
Mm-hmm.
And Matt Brewis said to our lawyer that there was things he could do behind the scene, and he would speak to the ombudsman, and he saw the letter of claim that our lawyer had put together, but everything he put together, obviously in legal terms, was exactly the same evidence that Paul Carlier had submitted, but they wouldn't accept it. And then Andrew Bailey, a letter to or whatever his name was, the Lloyds Banking Group, the former CEO.
Yeah.
And he mentioned our case, not just our case, but in a wider thing. And the FCA denied that they had done that. I've got internal emails that they sent to the Complaints Commissioner where they categorically denied that Andrew Bailey wrote about our case, not just about our case, like I said, to Lloyds Banking Group. They categorically denied it. And now I have it. Just sickens me.
It does, Lisa. Lisa,
No,
we're all feeling for you, Lisa. It's so wrong. It's absolutely wrong.
They put him through, and now they're coming for me.
Yeah. Lisa,
in the letter I got yesterday, send their lawyer TLT. They defend everything they did.
Andy, can I ask you a favour? Lisa, sorry, can I come in here? Right, I'm not promising anything, but I'm still in touch with Andrew Bailey, right? You and I met, and I'd love to know what the FOS, all the platitudes and all the whatever you got from them, the same as we did. Caroline Wayman, who disappears into the sunset, and suddenly she's got a new job and hundreds of thousands of pounds, and she's a failing upwards, I would call it. All the meetings with Kevin Hornick and her and Andrew Bailey and Matt Bruce, who was his sidekick. 4 times we met them in a year, and the banks pushed back, and all we heard was that the banks basically legaled up. That was Andrew Bailey's terminology. He said his wife's American, and he said, there's this expression about legal up. Lisa, do me a favour. I'm going to send me what you've got, and I will call out Andrew Bailey on this, and I'll go and doorstep him at the Thread Needle Street, and I will take him what you've given, and I will say to him, there's still in WhatsApp messages every so often with him. It's all the platitudes. Now's the time for action. I will do what I can to get Bailey, and if we've got to get the press involved, we'll get the press involved. Okay?
Fantastic.
I've tried the press. I've tried them. They show interest, and then all of a sudden they just don't return the emails anymore.
We'll
Right,
give
it's
it.
an election year as well, so they're all up. They're all in a shaky peg, as they say in Scotland. All their jackets are on a shake.
Yeah. Ian, it's magnanimous of you to step forward in the way that you have, Ian. You've frozen. Lisa, thank you so much. Ian, I've put Lisa's phone number to you in a private message in the chat, so hopefully you've got that there. Lisa, as soon as the session finishes, I'm going to give you a call as well. We're concerned about you, Lisa. You know enough to know there are many people here who are genuinely trying to help. And Lisa, thank you so much for having the courage and the guts to speak out again. Remember, folks, all the time there's at least one person that hasn't given up, there's hope. All the time there's at least one person who hasn't given up, there's hope. And it's quite interesting, I wasn't expecting this, but several of you tonight have talked about the need for us to, frankly, the need for us to demonstrate our anger and our frustration. And maybe that's what it is. Maybe enough is enough. Lisa, thank you very much indeed. Ian Duffield, and then we'll go to others to share their thoughts. Thank you, Lisa. Ian, thank you.
Yeah, Lisa, I'm really, really sorry to hear of your distress. Andy, what I'm thinking of is I've had a fair bit of success with the few press articles. So I'm thinking now, Madeline Ross at the Telegraph, Ali Hussein at the Times, and the other chap, I think it was Benchley at the Times, and they've picked up the baton over the Woodford thing. And I know that's because they want to get on something that's a right thing, but it seems to me that certainly Madeline Ross was somebody who expressed concern. And when she came back to me for the second interview, even to the point of saying, I'm sorry to bring this up with you again, meaning, you know, the distress and the upset that we'd had. And I'm just thinking if we give either Lisa's details to them or their details to Lisa, in my experience, they've been people who want to listen. And certainly with Madeline Ross, what she was after was the human interest element here, which is clearly something, some support that Lisa desperately needs. So I'm just wondering if you could let Lisa have Madeline's details, Ali Hussein's details, which I think was the Times article that you just put the link up on. So there's probably three journalists there who may be helpful and get this out, because this is something that must get out into the public domain here.
It can all help. Thank you. What I'm going to do, guys, I'm going to ask Chelsea in the morning to fix up a Zoom meeting. Me, Paul Carrier, Lisa, and Ian. Hope you don't mind, folks, just to talk through the short-term game plan on Lisa's front. Lisa, you're not on your own. We'll do what we can to help you. And yeah, we will do what we can to help you. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Ian. Does anybody else have anything else they'd like to share before we start bringing our conversation to a close? I'm going to, in that case, I'm going to close just by speaking. I'm going to turn my brain off and just speak straight from the heart here. I've got no idea what I'm about to say, other than the fact that I feel disgusted, I feel angry, I feel frustrated, I feel shocked, I feel ashamed that things are the way that they are. I feel let down. I feel let down that we're all being tragically let down. Our politicians, there are some good ones, there's no doubt about it. There are some good ones who are trying to help, but they're working against a monolithic, gigantuan system that is working against ordinary people. It's been said already tonight. The contaminated blood scandal, the Grenfell scandal, the Hillsborough scandal, the bloody post office scandal, excuse my language, Woodford, Connaught, Link, Clydesdale, Blackmore Bond. You know, the list is ridiculously long. And what they all have in common is this sense of multi-agency failure. Our system is not working the way it should and the way it must. And we've got one simple choice. We either stand up or we stand by. We either fight or we give up. Everyone's going to have to make their own personal choice about that. But from this moment onwards, it's going to have to get far more serious than it has now. We've been taking a baseball bat to a gunfight, if you get my drift. Yeah, we've been underpowered, under-resourced, We need to define what our resources are. We need to make much better use of them, because otherwise we are outpowered, outmaneuvered, outgunned by a system that's completely uncaring and unfriendly. The one thing that might make a difference, folks, is the fact that we have a general election coming up. For God's sake, nobody vote for a political party that doesn't make some kind of commitment to trying to clean up the workings of the financial sector and the regulatory framework that governs it. We all know that the financial industry is profoundly important to the well-being of society, to economic stability, to political stability too. But all the time we have the Financial Conduct Authority and the Financial Ombudsman Service and the Financial Services Compensation Scheme and the City of London Police and the Metropolitan Police and the Serious Fraud Office, the lawyers, the accountants, and all these other agencies and bodies failing to do what they're supposed to be doing. We're going to have the same ongoing perpetual state of pain that so many of you are enduring. Please, I ask you, make a mental decision now to be part of the community that's going to stand up and fight. And we'll define what that fighting means in due course. We're going to be organising a march outside the FCA. The FCA comes up time and time and time again. We'll be sharing details about that march and that protest outside the FCA as soon as we can. And that's where we're going to take the attention to next. And let's see what we can do. Thank you all very much indeed for the speakers. Chelsea, I'll be emailing my colleague Chelsea to fix up some time on Zoom, hopefully tomorrow with Lisa and Ian and Paul Carlier. I'm saying Paul because I know he knows her case inside out, back to front as well. In the meantime, with a sense of frustration and anger and determination and commitment and resilience, we'll bring the session tonight to a close. I don't know about you, but I can big time relate to the idea that enough is enough. Enough is enough. Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you for your time tonight. Let's do what we can. Let's fight. Let's stand up and fight. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Good night.